There's a kind of fear that lives in your bones, the kind that whispers you're not safe anywhere, not even in your own skin. I lived with that fear for 3 years, carried it like a shadow I couldn't shake, until the day I stumbled into the wrong office with tears streaming down my face and found myself standing before the most dangerous man in the city. He should have terrified me more. Instead, he became the only place I ever felt safe. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you feel it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. The building on 5th and Morrison wasn't supposed to exist, not officially. It stood there like a secret between the legitimate storefronts and law offices, a structure of dark stone and tinted windows that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Most people walked past without truly seeing it, and those who did see it knew better than to look too long. I'd passed it 100 times on my way to work at the accounting firm 2 blocks over, never imagining I'd one day run through its doors like my life depended on it. That Wednesday started like any other nightmare. I woke at 6 to my phone buzzing with another blocked number, another message I wouldn't read but couldn't delete. The apartment felt too small, the walls pressing in with memories I couldn't escape. 3 years since I'd left Marcus. 3 years since I'd gathered the courage to walk away from his rage and his fists, and still he found ways to reach me. Restraining orders were just paper. Police reports were just files gathering dust. I was just a woman who'd made the mistake of loving the wrong man, and the system had no real way to protect me. Work was supposed to be my refuge, the place where I could pretend to be normal, pretend my hands didn't shake when my phone rang, pretend I didn't check over my shoulder every time I left a room. I was good at my job, brilliant even. Numbers made sense in a way people never did. Spreadsheets didn't lie, didn't manipulate, didn't turn loving words into weapons. I could lose myself in columns of data and forget for a few hours that I was a woman living in a cage of fear with invisible bars. But that Wednesday, Marcus was waiting in the lobby of my building. I saw him through the glass doors before he saw me, and my entire body went cold. He wasn't supposed to be here. The restraining order said 500 feet. But there he was, leaning against the reception desk with that smile that used to make my heart race and now made my stomach turn. The security guard was laughing at something he'd said, completely unaware that the charming man in the expensive suit had once held me down and screamed that he'd kill me if I ever tried to leave. I turned and ran. No thought, no plan, just pure animal instinct. Out the side exit, down the alley, my heels clicking against wet pavement as my breath came in sharp gasps. I could hear him behind me, his voice calling my name like he had every right to it, like those syllables belonged to him. The fear wasn't just in my bones anymore. It was in my blood, in my lungs, in every desperate beat of my heart. I burst onto 5th Avenue without looking, nearly colliding with a businessman who cursed as I stumbled past. My vision was blurring with tears, my chest so tight I thought my ribs might crack. I needed to get inside somewhere, anywhere, needed walls and locks and distance. The dark building loomed ahead, and without thinking, I grabbed the handle of its heavy door and pulled. It opened. I fell inside, literally fell, catching myself on my hands as the door swung shut behind me with a sound like a vault closing. The sudden silence was deafening. No traffic noise, no city sounds, just the echo of my ragged breathing in a space that felt carved from shadow. I was in a lobby, but not like any lobby I'd ever seen. Dark wood paneling, dim lighting, the scent of expensive leather, and something else. Something sharp and dangerous like gunpowder and cologne. I pushed myself up, my palms stinging, and realized I was crying. Really crying. The kind of tears that come from a place so deep you didn't know it existed until it breaks open. My mascara was probably running. My blouse was torn at the shoulder, where I'd caught it on something in my flight. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman running for her life. "Help!" I managed to say to the empty lobby, my voice breaking. "Please, someone, help me!" A door opened, not the one I'd come through, but another hidden in the paneling, and a man stepped out. For a moment I couldn't process what I was seeing. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that filled his black suit jacket like he was built for violence. Dark hair pushed back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and hard lines. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath, gray like storm clouds, cold and assessing as they took in every detail of my disheveled appearance. This was not a man who helped people. This was a man people feared. I'd run from one monster straight into the den of another, and some distant, logical part of my brain was screaming at me to turn around, to take my chances with Marcus on the street. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, trembling, tears still streaming down my face, as those cold gray eyes studied me with an intensity that should have felt threatening, but somehow didn't. "Please," I whispered again, because it was the only word I had left. He didn't speak. He moved, crossing the lobby in 3 long strides, and suddenly he was close enough that I could smell cedar and smoke and something darker. His hand came up, and I flinched instinctively, my body remembering blows even as my mind tried to tell me to stay still. But his touch, when it came, was gentle. His fingers curled under my chin, tilting my face up to the light, and his eyes narrowed as he took in the tears, the fear, the desperation written across every feature. "Who hurt you?" His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, but there was something in it that made the air feel heavy, dangerous. It wasn't a casual question. It was a promise wrapped in 3 words, a vow that whoever had put that look in my eyes would pay for it. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. How do you explain 3 years of fear to a stranger? How do you put words to the way terror becomes a constant companion, the way you learn to sleep with one eye open, the way you measure your life in moments between panic attacks? I couldn't. So I just stood there, shaking under the weight of his gaze, feeling like he was seeing straight through to every broken piece of me. The front door rattled. Someone was trying the handle, pulling hard against the lock that had apparently engaged when I'd stumbled inside. Through the frosted glass, I could see a shape, male, furious. Marcus. He was here. He'd followed me, and now he was trying to get in, and I was trapped with a stranger who might be just as dangerous. "Is that him?" the man in front of me asked, his eyes never leaving my face, even as the door rattled again, harder this time. I nodded, unable to form words. My whole body was trembling now, adrenaline and fear making my knees weak. I was going to collapse. I was going to fall apart right here in this dark lobby, and Marcus was going to get in, and this time he wouldn't just threaten. This time he'd make good on every promise he'd ever made. The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and calculating and absolutely merciless. He released my chin, and for a second, I thought he was going to walk away, going to leave me to face Marcus alone. Instead, he moved past me to the door, and when he opened it, I actually whimpered. But he didn't let Marcus in. He stepped outside, filling the doorway with his presence, and pulled the door shut behind him. I couldn't hear what was being said through the thick wood and glass, but I could see shapes moving, could see the way Marcus gestured angrily, could see the exact moment when the stranger said something that made Marcus go very, very still. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Then Marcus was walking away. Not running, not storming off, just walking with the careful precision of a man who'd been given a warning he actually believed. The stranger watched until Marcus disappeared around the corner, then opened the door and stepped back inside. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something I didn't expect. Not pity, not disgust, not the uncomfortable uncertainty most people showed when confronted with someone else's damage. Just a calm, steady assessment, like he was trying to solve a problem, like I was a puzzle he needed to figure out. "Come," he said simply, and started, walking toward the hidden door he'd emerged from. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to not follow this dangerous stranger deeper into this dark building. But my legs moved without consulting my brain, carrying me after him because somehow, impossibly, I felt safer following him into the unknown than I did facing the world I knew. The hallway beyond the door was long and quiet, carpeted in deep burgundy that absorbed the sound of our footsteps. Paintings lined the walls, expensive ones, originals that probably cost more than I made in a year. Everything about this place whispered money and power and danger, the kind of danger that wore expensive suits and made problems disappear. He led me to an office at the end of the hall, and when he opened the door, I stepped into a space that felt like stepping into the mind of a king. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, but the glass was tinted so dark that the view seemed distant, removed, like watching the world through a veil. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface empty except for a single lamp and a crystal glass half full of amber liquid. Leather chairs, dark wood, shelves lined with books that looked actually read. This wasn't an office designed to impress. This was a room where real power lived. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs facing the desk. I sat, perching on the edge like a bird ready to flee, my hands twisted together in my lap. He moved to the windows, standing with his back to me, looking out at the city he clearly owned in ways I couldn't begin to understand. "Your name," he said, not asking, just stating that he wanted it. "Elena," I whispered. "Elena Morrison." He nodded once, still not turning around. "And the man outside, who is he to you?" "My ex." The words tasted like ash. "Marcus Reed. We were together for 2 years. I left him 3 years ago, but he won't let me go. He says I belong to him, that I always will, that if he can't have me, no one can." Silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. I watched his reflection in the dark window, saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands clasped behind his back, like he was physically restraining himself from something. "Has he hurt you?" His voice was still quiet, still controlled, but there was an edge to it now, something sharp enough to cut. I laughed, a broken sound without humor. "He hospitalized me twice, broke my ribs, my wrist, gave me a concussion that had me seeing double for a week. I have a restraining order, but he violates it constantly. The police say they can't do anything unless he actually attacks me, and by then—" I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. By then, it would be too late. We both knew it. He finally turned to face me, and the expression on his face made my breath catch. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't even anger. Not exactly. It was something colder, more absolute, like he'd just made a decision that couldn't be, unmade. "Do you know who I am, Elena?" he asked. I shook my head, even though I was starting to suspect, starting to piece together the building, the security, the way Marcus had retreated like a kicked dog. "My name is Salvatore Moroni," he said, and even though I'd never heard the name before, the way he said it made everything click into place. This wasn't just a businessman. This was the businessman, the one the news whispered about but never named, the one the police couldn't touch because he owned half of them. This was the man who controlled everything that happened in the shadows of this city. And I just stumbled into his office crying. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt something strange and unexpected. Relief. Because a man like this, a man with this kind of power, could do what the law couldn't. Could make Marcus disappear. Could give me the one thing I'd been desperate for since the day I'd escaped. Freedom. I didn't know, I said quietly, meeting his eyes even though it took every ounce of courage I had. I was just running. I didn't mean to bring my problems to your door. And yet you did. He moved to his desk, leaning against it with his arms crossed, studying me with that same intense focus. Tell me, Elena, what do you want? Not what you think you should say, not what sounds right. What do you actually want? The question hung in the air between us, sharp and dangerous. What did I want? I wanted to feel safe. I wanted to sleep through the night without nightmares. I wanted to walk down the street without checking over my shoulder. I wanted Marcus gone, erased, removed from my life so completely that even his memory couldn't touch me anymore. I want him to stop, I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. I want him to leave me alone. I want to not be afraid anymore. Salvatore nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he already knew. And if I told you I could make that happen, that I could ensure Marcus Reed never bothers you again? My heart started racing, hope and fear tangling together until I couldn't tell them apart. What would you want in return? Because men like him didn't do favors out of kindness. There was always a price, always something they wanted. I'd learned that lesson the hard way with Marcus, who'd seemed so perfect at first, so generous and attentive, until I'd realized that every gift came with strings. Every kindness was a chain binding me tighter. Something flickered across Salvatore's face, too quick to read. Nothing, he said finally. I don't prey on frightened women, Elena. If I help you, it's because it's the right thing to do, not because I expect payment. I stared at him, trying to understand, trying to find the angle, the trap, the catch. Men like him didn't operate on morality. They operated on power and leverage and self-interest. But his eyes were steady on mine, gray and cold, and somehow, impossibly, honest. Why? I whispered. Why would you help me? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, like he was seeing something far away. Because once, a long time ago, someone I cared about was in a similar situation, and I wasn't powerful enough to stop what happened to her. Now I am. The words settled over me like a blanket, heavy with old pain and newer purpose. This wasn't about me, not really. I was a proxy, a chance for him to rewrite a history he couldn't change. I should have felt used, should have been angry at being someone's redemption project. Instead, I just felt grateful that his demons aligned with my desperation. Okay, I said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff. Help me. He pushed off the desk, reaching for the phone on its surface. Stay here. I'm going to make some calls. There's a bathroom through that door if you want to clean up. I looked down at myself, at my torn blouse and smeared makeup, and felt a fresh wave of shame. This was who I'd become. A woman who fell apart in strangers' offices, who looked like a victim, because that's exactly what I was. I stood on shaking legs and made my way to the bathroom he'd indicated, desperate to put myself back together, even if it was just an illusion. The bathroom was all black marble and gold fixtures, luxury that felt obscene given my current state. I stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror, really looked, and barely recognized the woman staring back. Hollow eyes, gaunt cheeks, the pallor of someone who hadn't slept properly in months. When had I become this ghost of myself? I washed my face, cold water shocking against my heated skin, and watched the mascara swirl down the drain like evidence of my breakdown. My blouse was beyond saving, the tear at the shoulder exposing my bra strap, and a bruise I didn't remember getting. I didn't have anything to change into, so I just tried to arrange it in a way that looked less desperate, less broken. When I emerged, Salvatore was behind his desk, speaking quietly into the phone in a language I didn't understand. Italian, maybe, or something close to it. His voice was different when he spoke it, smoother somehow, the hard edges softer. He saw me and held up one finger, asking for another minute, then finished his conversation and set the phone down. "It's done," he said simply. I sank back into the chair, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. "What's done?" "Marcus Reed will receive a visit tonight. Men who work for me will explain, in terms he cannot misunderstand, that you are under my protection now. That if he so much as looks at you again, if he even thinks your name, there will be consequences. He won't survive." The words should have shocked me, should have made me recoil from the casual mention of violence, of threats, of the kind of power that operated outside the law. Instead, I felt something warm unfurl in my chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Will he believe them?" I asked, because Marcus was stubborn, arrogant, convinced of his own invincibility. Salvatore's smile was thin and cold. "He'll believe them. I don't make empty threats, and the men who work for me have reputations that speak for themselves. By tomorrow morning, Marcus Reed will be convinced that touching you would be signing his own death warrant." I closed my eyes, letting it sink in. Safety. Real safety. Not just restraining orders and police reports that never led anywhere. Protection from someone who actually had the power to enforce it. It felt like being able to breathe for the first time in 3 years. "Thank you," I whispered, and the words were completely inadequate for what he'd just given me. He waved it away, uncomfortable with gratitude in a way that made him suddenly more human, more real. "You should go home. Pack a bag. I'm having an apartment prepared for you. Somewhere Marcus doesn't know about, somewhere secure. You'll move in tomorrow." I opened my eyes, staring at him. "An apartment? I can't accept that. I can't let you." "You can and you will," he interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The building you're in now is too exposed. Your locks are inadequate. Your neighbors don't pay attention. You're vulnerable there, and I don't protect people halfway, Elena. Either I do this right, or I don't do it at all." The apartment building on Park Avenue was the kind of place I'd only ever walked past, never imagining I'd actually enter. Doormen in uniforms, a lobby with actual art, the kind of residents who had drivers and personal assistants. Salvatore's men had moved me in while I was at work, efficient and invisible, so that when I arrived that evening, everything was already in place. My furniture looked small and shabby in the spacious rooms, my books and clothes and kitchen items scattered like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit the picture. But the walls were solid, the locks were heavy-duty, and there was a security system that probably cost more than my car. For the first time in 3 years, I stood in my own space and didn't feel hunted. That night, I slept. Really slept. 8 hours straight without jerking awake at every sound, without nightmares of hands around my throat and voices promising violence. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows that faced east, and for a moment, I didn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then it all came back. The running, the office, the gray eyes that had looked at me like I was a problem he could actually solve. Work felt different that day. I walked into the building without checking over my shoulder, rode the elevator without my stomach churning, sat at my desk, and actually focused on the numbers in front of me. My coworkers noticed. Sarah from accounting asked if I'd gotten a new haircut. Tom from finance said I seemed different, lighter somehow. I just smiled and told them I'd started sleeping better. The flowers arrived at 3 o'clock, a massive arrangement of white, roses and lilies, expensive and elegant, with a card that simply said, "You're safe now. S." I stared at them for a long moment, my throat tight with an emotion I couldn't name. No one had given me flowers in years. Marcus used to, at first, before the flowers became apologies for bruises. These were different. These weren't guilt or manipulation. These were just acknowledgement that I existed, that I mattered, that someone had thought of me in the middle of their day. I touched one of the petals, soft as silk, and felt something shift in my chest. I should have left it there, should have accepted the protection and the apartment, and moved on with my life, grateful for the intervention but smart enough not to get involved any further with a man like Salvatore Moroni. But that evening, instead of going home, I found myself walking to the building on 5th and Morrison. The door opened for me this time without resistance, like it had been waiting. The same dark lobby, the same heavy silence. But now it felt almost familiar, less threatening. I approached the hidden door and knocked, my heart racing with something that wasn't quite fear. It opened almost immediately. A man I didn't recognize stood there, tall and broad and dangerous looking, with a scar running through one eyebrow. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once like I'd passed some test. "He's expecting you." I hadn't called ahead, hadn't made an appointment. But somehow Salvatore had known I would come, and that should have unnerved me more than it did. Instead, I just followed the scarred man down the hallway to the office at the end, where Salvatore stood at his windows again, looking out at his kingdom. "Elena," he said without turning around, "how was your first night in the new apartment?" "Quiet," I said, and the word carried more weight than it should. "Thank you for the flowers." He turned then, and something in his expression made my breath catch. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept as well as I had. And there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of stress I couldn't begin to imagine. "You didn't have to come here to thank me," he said. "A text would have sufficed." "I know, but I wanted to see you." The admission hung in the air between us, honest and dangerous. "I wanted to ask you something." He gestured to the chairs, and we both sat. The desk between us like a barrier, neither of us was ready to cross. "Ask." "The woman you mentioned," I said carefully. "The one you couldn't help. What happened to her?" His expression closed off immediately, walls slamming down behind his eyes. I thought he wouldn't answer, thought I'd pushed too far too fast. But then he spoke, his voice rough with old pain. "Her name was Isabella, my sister." He stared at his hands, and I realized they were clenched into fists on the desk. She married young, to a man our father approved of, a man with connections and money and the right family name. We didn't know at first that he was hurting her. She hid it well, made excuses, wore long sleeves and high collars. By the time I figured it out, by the time I was old enough and powerful enough to do something about it, it was too late. I knew what too late meant before he said it, could see it in the way he held himself, the way his jaw tightened against words he didn't want to speak. "She died," I whispered. "He killed her, made it look like an accident, like she'd fallen down the stairs. But I knew, and I couldn't prove it. And our family's lawyers and his family's money made sure he never faced consequences." He looked up at me then, and his eyes were haunted. "So yes, Elena, when I saw you in my lobby, terrified and running, I saw her. And this time, I had the power to do something about it." Tears burned in my eyes, not for myself, but for him. For the boy who'd lost his sister to violence and grown into a man who ruled through it. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He unclenched his fists, flexing his fingers like they hurt. Isabella's death taught me something important. That the law doesn't protect people like her, like you. That sometimes the only justice available is the kind we make ourselves. I understood then why he did what he did, why he'd built an empire in the shadows. It wasn't just about power or money or control. It was about being strong enough to protect the people the system failed, about creating a world where men like Marcus and Isabella's husband learned that some prey couldn't be touched without consequences. "Thank you," I said again, and this time he didn't wave it away. He just nodded, accepting it, and something passed between us in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. I started coming to the building on 5th and Morrison regularly after that. Not every day, but often enough that the men who worked there stopped questioning my presence, stopped asking if I had an appointment. They'd just nod and step aside, letting me through to the hallway that led to Salvatore's office. At first, I told myself I was just checking in, making sure Marcus was really staying away, confirming that the protection was holding. But as days turned into weeks, I had to admit the truth. I came because I wanted to. Because something about being in that office, sitting across from that man, made me feel more solid, more real than I had in years. We didn't always talk about heavy things. Sometimes we just sat in comfortable silence, me reading a book I'd brought while he worked through stacks of paperwork. Sometimes we talked about nothing important, about the weather, or the news, or the restaurant that had opened down the street. But underneath every conversation was a current of something deeper, an awareness of each other that made the air feel charged. He never touched me, never crossed the line from protector to something else. But I found myself wanting him to, found myself watching his hands and wondering what they'd feel like against my skin, wondering if someone who dealt in violence could also be gentle. One evening, about a month after we'd met, I arrived to find his office empty. The scarred man, whose name I'd learned was Vincent, told me Salvatore had been called away on business, but had left instructions for me to wait if I wanted to. I settled into one of the leather chairs, pulling out my book, content to simply be in his space even if he wasn't there. I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to the feeling of something warm and soft being draped over my shoulders. I blinked up to find Salvatore standing over me, his suit jacket now covering me like a blanket, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You didn't have to wait," he said softly, and his voice had a quality I'd never heard before, something almost tender. "I wanted to," I admitted, still foggy from sleep. "I like being here." He crouched down so we were eye level, and the movement brought him close enough that I could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could smell the cedar and smoke scent that clung to him. "Elena, you should go home. Get proper rest in your own bed." But I didn't want to go home. I wanted to stay here, in this dark office with this dangerous man who'd somehow become the safest person I knew. I reached out without thinking, my fingers brushing against his jaw, feeling the roughness of stubble under my palm. He went very still, his eyes closing like my touch caused him pain. "Don't," he said. But it came out rough, more plea than command. "Why not?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He opened his eyes, and what I saw there made my heart stutter. Hunger, raw and desperate, the kind that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with need. But underneath it was restraint, iron control holding him back from reaching for what he wanted. "Because you've been hurt enough," he said, his voice strained. "Because you came to me for protection, not for this. Because I have rules, Elena, and one of them is that I don't take advantage of vulnerable women who trust me." "And if I'm not vulnerable?" I asked, my hand still against his face, my thumb brushing his cheekbone. "If I'm choosing this, choosing you, with full awareness of who you are and what you do?" He caught my wrist, his grip gentle but firm, and pulled my hand away from his face. You can't choose this. You don't know what you'd be getting into, what my life really looks like. I'm not a good man, Elena. I do things that would horrify you. I make decisions that cost lives. You deserve better than that." "Maybe," I agreed, and his eyes widened slightly, like he'd expected me to argue. "But I don't want better. I want you." The confession hung between us, honest and terrifying. I'd just told one of the most powerful men in the city that I wanted him, and I had no idea how he'd respond. He could reject me, could send me away, could maintain his careful distance and leave me to wonder what might have been. Instead, he did something I never expected. He stood, pulling me up with him, and then he wrapped his arms around me and held me close, just held me, his chin resting on top of my head, while I pressed my face against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "You're going to be the death of me," he murmured into my hair, and I felt him shake his head slowly. "But I can't seem to make you leave." "Then don't," I said, my words muffled by his shirt. "Let me stay." We stood like that for a long time, wrapped together in the dim office, while the city sparkled outside the dark windows. It wasn't a kiss, wasn't anything overtly romantic, but it felt more intimate than anything I'd experienced before. It was acceptance and acknowledgement, and the first tentative step towards something neither of us had names for yet. When he finally released me, his hands lingered on my arms, steadying me. "Let me drive you home," he said. "It's late, and I don't like the thought of you taking the subway alone." I nodded, and we left the office together, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back as we walked through the building. Men stepped aside as we passed, their expressions carefully neutral, but I could feel their awareness, their surprise at seeing me with him like this. The car waiting at the curb wasn't what I expected. I'd been picturing something ostentatious, something that screamed money and power. Instead, it was a simple black sedan, expensive but understated, the kind that didn't draw attention. The driver opened the back door, and Salvatore gestured for me to enter first. Inside, the leather seats were soft and warm, and the space felt private, intimate in a way that made my pulse quicken. Salvatore slid in beside me, close enough that I could feel his warmth, but not quite touching, and the driver pulled smoothly into traffic. "Tell me about your family," Salvatore said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Your parents, siblings, the life you had before Marcus." I was surprised by the question, by his genuine interest in parts of me that had nothing to do with fear or protection. "My parents died when I was 20, I said, the old grief familiar and distant. "Car accident, sudden and complete. I have a brother, older, but we don't talk much. He didn't approve of Marcus, told me I was making a mistake, and when I didn't listen, he kind of disappeared from my life. I haven't heard from him in almost 5 years. He was right, though, about Marcus. Yes." I looked out the window at the passing city lights. But admitting that felt like admitting I'd wasted years of my life, like acknowledging that everyone who'd warned me was right, and I was wrong. Pride is a dangerous thing. "No," Salvatore said firmly. "What's dangerous is men who pretend to love you and use it as an excuse to hurt you. Your pride didn't cause that. Marcus's violence did." The absolution in his words made something tight in my chest loosen. I'd been carrying the guilt for so long, believing on some level that if I'd just been smarter, more cautious, less naive, I could have avoided the whole nightmare. But he was right. The blame belonged to Marcus, not to me. "What about you?" I asked, turning to look at him in the dim interior. "You mentioned Isabella, but do you have other siblings? Are your parents still alive?" His expression darkened. "My father died 10 years ago. Heart attack, sudden and merciful. He was a hard man, built this organization from nothing, and ruled it with an iron fist. I learned everything from him: the business, the strategies, how to be ruthless when necessary. My mother is still alive, lives in Italy now. We talk occasionally, but she's never forgiven me for following in my father's footsteps instead of choosing something legitimate. And siblings besides Isabella? A younger brother, Marco. He's legitimate, everything my mother wanted for me. Lawyer, clean reputation, married with 2 kids. We're not close. He sees me as a disappointment to the family name, and I see him as willfully blind to the realities that put food on his table growing up. There was old bitterness in his voice, family wounds that hadn't healed. We fell silent as the car navigated through traffic, and I found myself studying his profile in the passing streetlights. Strong jaw, straight nose, lips that looked carved from stone, but I imagined could be soft under the right circumstances. He was beautiful in a harsh way, like a sculpture designed to intimidate rather than comfort. "Can I ask you something?" I said softly. "You can ask. I might not answer. When you first saw me in your lobby, when I was crying and desperate, what did you think?" He turned to look at me, and in the darkness of the car, his eyes seemed to glow. "I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever seen." I blinked, confused. Brave? I was terrified. I could barely stand. Exactly. You were terrified, and you were still standing, still asking for help instead of giving up, still fighting even though you had every reason to just collapse. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair behind my ear, in a gesture so gentle it made my breath catch. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Elena. It's being afraid and moving forward anyway. You ran into a building full of dangerous men because you needed sanctuary, and you didn't even know if you'd find it. That takes a particular kind of strength. No one had ever called me strong before. Marcus had called me weak, pathetic, nothing without him. But Salvatore looked at me and saw something different, something I was only just beginning to recognize in myself. The car pulled up to my building, and the driver got out to open my door. I hesitated, not wanting the evening to end, not wanting to leave the cocoon of safety and warmth that being near Salvatore created. He seemed to sense my reluctance because he got out with me, walking me to the door even though his driver was waiting. "Thank you," I said, looking up at him under the streetlight. "For the ride, for the conversation, for everything." "Elena," he said, and my name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I need you to understand something. I meant what I said in the office. I'm not a good man. The things I do, the choices I make, they're not the kind that lead to happy endings. If you get involved with me, if this goes where I think it's going, your life will be complicated in ways you can't imagine." "I know," I said, even though I probably didn't really know, not fully. "But I also know that I feel safer with you than I've felt with anyone else in my entire life. That when I'm near you, I can breathe. That for the first time in years, I'm not just surviving, I'm living. So whatever complications come, whatever darkness exists in your world, I think it's worth it." He closed his eyes, his jaw tightening like he was fighting some internal battle. Then he opened them and cupped my face in both hands, his palms warm against my cheeks. "If I start this," he said, his voice rough, "if I let myself want you the way I already do, I won't be able to stop. I'm not a man who does things halfway, Elena. When I commit completely. Are you ready for that?" My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I didn't hesitate. "Yes." He leaned down slowly, giving me time to pull away, to change my mind. But I didn't move, didn't breathe, just waited as his lips brushed against mine in a kiss that was gentle and searching and somehow more intense than anything I'd ever experienced. His hand stayed on my face, holding me like I was something precious, something that might break if he wasn't careful. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "Go inside," he murmured, "before I forget every rule I've ever made and follow you up." I smiled against his lips, feeling bold in a way I never had before. "Maybe I want you to forget your rules." "Not tonight," he said firmly, even though I could feel the tension in his body, the restraint it was costing him. "Not when we've just started this. I want to do this right, Elena. I want to give you time to be sure, to understand what you're choosing. Because once I have you, I won't let you go easily." The possessiveness in his words should have scared me, should have triggered memories of Marcus's obsessive control. But coming from Salvatore, it felt different. It wasn't about ownership or domination. It was about commitment, about a man who'd lost someone he couldn't protect, and was determined never to fail that way again. "Okay," I agreed, even though my body was screaming at me to pull him back, to drag him upstairs and show him just how sure I was. "But Salvatore, I'm already sure. This isn't fear or gratitude or confusion. This is me choosing you with clear eyes and full understanding." He kissed me again, harder this time, like he was sealing a promise. Then he pulled away and walked back to the car, and I watched until the tail lights disappeared around the corner before I finally went inside. That night, I lay in bed, replaying the kiss over and over, my fingers touching my lips, like I could still feel him there. Everything was changing, shifting, becoming something new and terrifying and wonderful. I should have been afraid of how fast this was moving, how quickly Salvatore had gone from stranger to protector to something I didn't have words for yet. But I wasn't afraid. For the first time in longer than I could remember, fear had no place in my thoughts. There was only anticipation, curiosity, and a warmth spreading through my chest that felt suspiciously like happiness. The next morning, I woke to a text from an unknown number. Just 5 words, but they made me smile against my pillow. "Coffee at 10. My office. S." I spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing what to wear, settling finally on a navy dress that was professional enough for work, but still showed I'd made an effort. I did my makeup carefully, taking time I usually didn't bother with, and actually styled my hair instead of just pulling it back in a ponytail. Sarah from accounting noticed immediately when I came in. "Okay, what's going on? You look amazing. New boyfriend?" I blushed, which apparently was answer enough, because she squealed and demanded details. I gave her a sanitized version, just that I'd met someone, that it was new, that I was happy. I didn't mention who he was or what he did, didn't explain that my new boyfriend was the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. Some things were better kept private. At 9:30, I slipped out of the office, claiming a dentist appointment, and walked the 2 blocks to 5th and Morrison. The door opened for me before I could reach for the handle, and Vincent was there with his scarred face and knowing eyes. "He's been watching the clock since 9, Vincent said, and there might have been the ghost of a smile on his usually stoic face. Never seen the boss nervous before. It's unsettling. The thought of Salvatore being nervous because of me made something warm bloom in my chest. I made my way to his office, knocking once before entering, and found him standing at his desk with 2 coffee cups and a bag from an expensive bakery I recognized from its distinctive logo. "You didn't have to get all this," I said, gesturing at the spread. "I wanted to." He pulled out a chair for me, and the simple courtesy made me ridiculously happy. "Besides, I realized I don't actually know how you take your coffee. I got 3 different options." I laughed, picking up the one that looked like it had cream and sugar. "This is perfect. Thank you." We sat across from each other, the desk between us like always. But everything felt different now. The air was charged with new awareness, with the memory of last night's kiss and the promise of more to come. We talked about nothing important, small details about our mornings, a story he told about Marco's kids, my complaints about a difficult client at work. But underneath the mundane conversation was a current of something deeper, a getting-to-know-you dance that felt significant despite its surface simplicity. He asked about my favorite books, my taste in music, whether I preferred the ocean or mountains. I learned that he played piano, that he'd wanted to be an architect before his father's death forced him into the family business, that he hated olives with an irrational passion that made me laugh. "What?" he asked, smiling at my reaction. "Everyone has irrational food aversions." "It's not that," I said, still giggling. "It's just so normal. You're this powerful, intimidating man who controls half the city, and you won't eat olives." "I contain multitudes," he said dryly, and the literary reference surprised me enough that I stopped laughing. "You read poetry?" He looked almost embarrassed. "Isabella loved it. After she died, I read everything she'd ever recommended, trying to understand what she'd seen in the words. Some of it stuck." The mention of his sister sobered us both, a reminder that underneath all the power and control was a man who'd been shaped by loss and grief. I reached across the desk without thinking, covering his hand with mine, and he turned his palm up to lace our fingers together. "Tell me about her," I said softly. "Not how she died, but who she was. What made her laugh, what she dreamed about." He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb absently stroking the back of my hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, lost in memory. "Isabella was 5 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, I was completely wrapped around her little finger. She had this laugh, this bright, infectious sound that could make even our father smile. And that man smiled about as often as it snowed in summer." I stayed quiet, letting him remember, watching the way his expression softened as he talked about her. She loved music, wanted to be a singer, had this beautiful voice, could have been famous if our father had let her. But he said it wasn't appropriate for a Maroney to perform, that we didn't parade ourselves for entertainment. So she sang at home, in the garden, anywhere she thought no one was listening. But I always listened. I'd sit on the stairs outside her room and just absorb the sound of her happiness. "She sounds wonderful," I said, and meant it. She was. But she was also stubborn and reckless, and absolutely convinced she was invincible. That's how she ended up with him, her husband. His name was Antonio Ricci, and he was everything our father wanted in a son-in-law. Old money, good family, connections to families in New York and Chicago. Isabella didn't love him, but our father pushed hard, and she gave in because
Jennifer Callahan had been running long-haul routes for 12 years, and her CB radio was her constant companion. She'd heard trucker gossip, weather warnings, smoky reports, and late-night philosophical discussions that ranged from profound to ridiculous. But what came through her speakers on a February night in 2023 was something else entirely. Something that still makes her check over her shoulder when she's alone in her cab. Jennifer was hauling furniture from North Carolina to a warehouse in Indianapolis, running north on Interstate 77 through the mountains of Virginia. It was just past midnight, the kind of cold that made the stars look sharp and close, and the traffic was light. Just her and a few other trucks scattered across the miles, their lights visible occasionally in the distance. Her CB was on but quiet, tuned to Channel 19 like always. She'd just passed the Fancy Gap area when her radio crackled to life. But it wasn't the usual trucker chatter. It was a voice, male, speaking slowly and clearly. "Attention all drivers on Interstate 77 northbound. This is an emergency broadcast. Do not exit the highway. Do not stop. Continue north at current speed. Acknowledge if you can hear this message. Jennifer frowned and grabbed her mic. This is Nighthawk, I copy. What's the nature of the emergency? She waited for a response, but none came. Instead, the voice repeated the same message, word for word, in exactly the same tone. Attention all drivers on Interstate 77 northbound. This is an emergency broadcast. Do not exit the highway. Do not stop. Continue north at current speed. Acknowledge if you can hear this message. She tried again. Nighthawk to emergency broadcast. What's happening? What's the threat? Still no response. Just the same message repeating on a loop. Jennifer checked her phone to see if there were any alerts, any news about an accident or hazmat spill or something that would warrant an emergency broadcast, but her phone showed nothing unusual. No alerts, no news notifications. The voice continued its loop, and Jennifer noticed something odd about it. It was too consistent, not just in the words, but in every tiny detail. The exact same inflection, the exact same pause between sentences, the exact same slight crackle of static at the word northbound. It was a recording, clearly, but that raised questions. Who was broadcasting it, and why? She switched to Channel 9, the emergency channel, but heard nothing. Back to 19, and the message was still there. She tried several other channels and found the same message on all of them. Every channel on her CB was broadcasting the same loop. Attention all drivers on Interstate 77 northbound. This is an emergency broadcast. Do not exit the highway. Do not stop. Continue north at current speed. Acknowledge if you can hear this message. Jennifer's unease grew. She'd been driving long enough to know when something
natural about Antonio Ricci's death. Salvatore had waited, planned, and eventually gotten the justice the law had denied him. And he wasn't sorry. I should have been horrified, should have been pulling away from a man who just calmly admitted to murder. But all I felt was a fierce satisfaction that Isabella's killer had faced consequences, that Salvatore had loved his sister enough to risk everything for vengeance. Good, I said simply, and his eyes widened slightly in surprise. He deserved worse. Something shifted in Salvatore's expression, a wariness giving way to something that looked like relief. You don't judge me for it? How can I judge you for getting justice when the system failed? How can I condemn you for protecting your sister's memory when no one else would? I leaned forward, needing him to understand. I'm not naive, Salvatore. I know what you do, what your world involves. And I'm not saying I approve of everything, that I'm comfortable with all of it. But this, avenging Isabella, I can't fault you for that. He stood abruptly, moving around the desk with swift purpose, and pulled me out of my chair and into his arms. The kiss was different this time, deeper, more desperate, like he'd been holding something back, and my acceptance had finally broken his restraint. His hands tangled in my hair, his body pressed against mine, and I felt the full force of his need, his hunger, his relief at being seen and not rejected. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he kept his forehead pressed to mine. You're dangerous, he murmured, his voice rough. You make me want things I swore I'd never let myself have. Make me believe in possibilities I'd written off years ago. What kind of things? I asked, my hands fisted in his shirt, not ready to let him go. A life that's more than just business and vengeance. Someone to come home to who sees all of me and doesn't run. A future that isn't just about accumulating power and settling old scores. He pulled back enough to look at me, his gray eyes intense. You, Elena. I want you in every way a man can want a woman, and it terrifies me because I haven't wanted anything this much since Isabella died. The confession hung between us, raw and honest, and I realized we were standing at a crossroads. We could pull back now, could keep this safe and surface level, protector, and protected with nothing deeper. Or we could step forward into something real and messy and potentially devastating. I chose forward. I always would with him. "Then have me," I said, my voice steady despite the way my heart was racing. "Stop holding back. Stop protecting me from yourself. I'm not fragile, Salvatore. I'm not going to shatter if you show me who you really are." His eyes darkened, and I could see him warring with himself, with years of self-control and careful restraint. Then something seemed to break in him, and he kissed me again, harder this time, with none of the gentleness from before. This was hunger and need, and a man who'd finally stopped fighting himself. He backed me against the desk, his hands gripping my hips, and I gasped at the solid feel of him against me. This was what I'd wanted, what I'd been craving since that first night when he'd held me in this office, and I'd felt safe for the first time in years. Not just safety, though. I wanted the passion, the intensity, the all-consuming focus that he gave to everything he did. "Elena," he breathed against my lips, his hand sliding up my sides. "Tell me to stop. Tell me this is too fast, too soon." "No," I said firmly, my fingers working at the buttons of his shirt. "Don't stop. Don't you dare stop." He made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a groan, and then his mouth was on my neck, my collarbone, the sensitive spot behind my ear that made me shiver. His hands were everywhere, reverent and possessive, learning the shape of me through my clothes. Then his phone rang. The sound cut through the moment like a knife, harsh and insistent, and Salvatore cursed in Italian, his forehead dropping to my shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice strained. "I have to check. It's the emergency line." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing, and he pulled away to grab the phone from his desk. I watched as his expression shifted from frustrated to focused, all business in an instant. "When?" he asked, his tone sharp. "How many?" "No, don't move him yet. I'm on my way." He hung up and turned to me, and I could see the apology in his eyes. "I have to go. There's a situation that needs my immediate attention." "It's okay," I said, even though my body was still thrumming with unfulfilled need. "Go. Do what you need to do." He crossed back to me, cupping my face and kissing me softly. "Come to dinner tonight. My place. Let me cook for you. Let me finish what we started here properly, without interruptions." "You cook?" I asked, surprised enough to smile. "I contain multitudes, remember." He kissed me again, quick and hard. 8 o'clock. Vincent will pick you up at 7:30. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in his office with swollen lips and a racing heart, feeling like I'd just survived a hurricane and was already hoping for another storm. I went back to work in a daze, barely able to focus on the spreadsheets in front of me. Sarah took one look at me when I returned and laughed. "Okay, that was definitely not a dentist appointment. You look thoroughly kissed." I blushed, but couldn't stop smiling. "Maybe. Girl, I don't know who this mystery man is, but he's clearly good for you. I haven't seen you this happy since you started here." She was right. I was happy, truly happy, for the first time in longer than I could remember. And it wasn't just because of Salvatore, though he was certainly a major factor. It was because I'd finally stopped being afraid, stopped letting my past dictate my future, stopped believing that I didn't deserve good things. That evening, I went home and stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to wear to dinner at a mafia boss's apartment. Something told me casual wasn't going to cut it, but I also didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. I settled on a simple black dress that hugged in the right places, paired with heels I rarely wore because they made me 3 inches taller and used to make Marcus feel threatened. Vincent arrived exactly at 7:30, impeccably punctual, and drove me through the city to a neighborhood I'd never been to before, old money area, buildings with actual history, the kind of place where apartments cost more than most people made in a lifetime. We pulled up to a pre-war building with an actual doorman, and Vincent walked me inside, past the concierge, straight to a private elevator that required a key to operate. "Penthouse," Vincent said, inserting the key and pressing the only button. "Boss is expecting you." The elevator ride felt both too short and impossibly long. My stomach was doing complicated gymnastics, nerves and anticipation tangled together. The doors opened directly into an apartment, no hallway, just straight into a space that was somehow exactly what I'd expected, and nothing like I'd imagined. It was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, exposed brick walls, hardwood floors that gleamed in the soft lighting. But it was also lived in, comfortable. Books on shelves, a piano in the corner, photographs in frames, art that looked chosen for love rather than investment. This wasn't just a showpiece. This was a home. Salvatore emerged from what I assumed was the kitchen, and my breath caught. He'd changed from his usual suit into dark jeans and a simple black Henley that did absolutely unfair things to his shoulders. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd been running his hands through it, and his feet were bare on the hardwood floor. He looked real, human, accessible in a way I'd never seen him before. "Hi," he said, and there was something almost shy in his smile, like he was nervous about me being in his space. "Hi," replied, still taking in the apartment. "This is beautiful." "It's home." He crossed to me, taking my hands and pulling me further inside. "Come on, dinner's almost ready. I hope you like Italian, because that's pretty much all I know how to cook." The kitchen was open to the living space, all granite and stainless steel, but somehow still warm. Something on the stove smelled incredible, garlic and tomatoes and herbs, and there was a bottle of wine breathing on the counter next to 2 glasses. "You really do cook," I said, watching as he stirred something in a pan with the same focused attention he gave to everything. "Isabella taught me. She said a man who couldn't feed himself was helpless, and Moronis were never helpless." He smiled at the memory, and I saw the love there, the way he kept her alive by maintaining the skills she'd given him. She'd make me practice the same dish over and over until I got it right. This is her recipe for pasta alla matriciana. I've been making it for 20 years, and I can finally say it's almost as good as hers was. He poured us both wine, and we talked while he finished cooking. Easy conversation about nothing important. But I was learning that with Salvatore, the unimportant moments were actually the most revealing. The way he moved in his kitchen with complete confidence, the way he unconsciously hummed under his breath while he worked, the way he kept glancing at me like he couldn't quite believe I was really there. When the food was ready, he served it at a small table by the windows. The city spread out below us like a glittering carpet. The pasta was incredible, rich and savory and perfect, and I told him so. "Isabella would say it needs more pepper," he said, but he looked pleased with the compliment. We ate and talked and drank wine, and it felt surreal, sitting here with this man who controlled so much of the city's underworld, eating homemade pasta and discussing favorite movies like we were normal people on a normal date. But we weren't normal, and pretending otherwise would be a lie. "Can I ask you something?" I said when we'd finished eating, and moved to the couch with fresh glasses of wine. "Always. The emergency earlier, the phone call that interrupted us. Was it dangerous? Were you in danger?" He was quiet for a moment, considering how much to tell me. "One of my men was injured in a territorial dispute with another family. Not life-threatening, but he needed medical attention we couldn't provide through normal channels. I had to arrange transport to a doctor who wouldn't ask questions, make sure his family was taken care of, and send a message to the other family that this kind of thing won't be tolerated." "And the message?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted details, was delivered clearly and accepted with appropriate apologies. There won't be further incidents. He looked at me, his expression serious. This is my life, Elena. Negotiations that happen in the shadows, problems that get solved through, means the law wouldn't approve of. Constant vigilance to maintain the balance of power. It's not pretty, and it's not safe, and I won't lie and tell you otherwise. I know, I said, setting down my wine glass. And I'm not going to pretend I'm completely comfortable with all of it. But I also understand that you do what you do for reasons that make sense to you, that in your world there are different rules and different codes. I'm not asking you to change, Salvatore. I'm just asking you to let me in, to trust me enough to share the truth instead of trying to protect me from it. He pulled me closer, tucking me against his side so my head rested on his shoulder. You're remarkable, you know that. Most people want to see what they want to see. Believe the comfortable lie rather than face the complicated truth. But you look at the reality and don't flinch. I've lived through enough darkness to not be afraid of yours, I said softly. Marcus taught me what real monsters look like, what it means to live with someone who hurts you because they enjoy it, because they can. You're not that, Salvatore. You're dangerous, yes. You're ruthless when you need to be. But you're not cruel. You don't hurt people for pleasure. Everything you do has a purpose, a reason, even if I don't always understand it. He kissed the top of my head, and I felt him take a deep, shuddering breath. I don't deserve you, he murmured. Probably not, I agreed, smiling against his chest. But you're stuck with me anyway. We sat like that for a long time, wrapped together on his couch, while the city lights twinkled outside and jazz played softly from speakers I couldn't see. It was peaceful in a way I'd never experienced, safe in a way that had nothing to do with locks or security systems, and everything to do with the man beside me. Eventually, he shifted, tilting my face up to his. Stay, he said, and it wasn't quite a question. Not for that, not yet, but just stay. Sleep here tonight. Let me hold you without the pressure of anything else. Let me just be near you. I nodded, and he stood, pulling me up with him. He led me through the apartment to his bedroom, a space that was masculine and simple, all dark wood and clean lines. He gave me one of his shirts to sleep in, soft cotton that smelled like him, and left me alone to change while he dealt with something in another room. When I emerged, feeling small and vulnerable in his oversized shirt, he was waiting by the bed, already changed into sleep pants, and nothing else. I tried not to stare at his chest, at the muscles and the scars that told stories I didn't know yet, but he caught me looking and smiled. Come here, he said, pulling back the covers. I slid into bed beside him, and he immediately pulled me close, my back to his chest, his arm wrapped securely around my waist. It was intimate, but not sexual, comforting, but not constraining. His breath was warm against my neck, his heartbeat steady against my spine, and I realized this was what I'd been missing all along. Not just safety from external threats, but this. Someone who held me like I was precious, who made me feel wanted without demanding anything in return. Thank you, I whispered into the darkness. For what? For seeing me, for being patient, for not giving up on me, even when I was too broken to believe I deserved better. His arm tightened around me. You were never broken, Elena. Hurt, yes. Damaged by someone who should have treasured you, but never broken. You survived, and that takes a strength most people never have to find. I turned in his arms so I could face him, and in the dim light from the city outside, I could see his expression, open and honest, in a way I'd never seen before. I'm falling for you, I admitted. The words terrifying but true. I know it's fast. I know it's probably crazy. But I need you to know." He cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. "Then fall," he said simply. "Because I'm already there, and I'll catch you. I swear, Elena, I'll catch you every time." He kissed me then, soft and slow, like we had all the time in the world. And maybe we did. Maybe this was just the beginning of something that would last. Something that would grow and deepen and become the foundation of a life neither of us had expected, but both of us desperately wanted. I fell asleep in his arms, feeling safer and more cherished than I ever had in my life. And when I woke in the morning to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee brewing, I knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where I was supposed to be. The months that followed were a study in contrasts. By day, I was Elena Morrison, accountant, living a normal life of spreadsheets and client meetings. By night, I was Salvatore Moroni's woman, welcomed into a world of power and danger that operated in the spaces between laws. I learned to recognize the men who worked for him, learned their names and their roles, learned to read the subtle signals that meant trouble was brewing or deals were being made. I met his mother on a video call, an elegant woman in her 70s, who looked at me with sharp eyes and asked pointed questions in accented English. She didn't approve of her son's choices, didn't like that he'd followed his father into darkness. But she seemed to approve of me, or at least accept that I made him happy in ways she couldn't. His brother Marco was less welcoming, polite but distant, making it clear he wanted nothing to do with his brother's world, and, by extension, me. But I didn't need his approval. I had Salvatore's love, and that was enough. Marcus never bothered me again. True to his word, Salvatore's men had delivered a message that was apparently crystal clear, because Marcus moved to another state within a month and never once tried to contact me. I was free, truly free, for the first time since I'd left him. The restraining order became unnecessary paperwork, a relic of a time when I'd been powerless and afraid. Now, I was neither. 6 months after that first night in his apartment, Salvatore took me back to the building on 5th and Morrison, to his office where everything had started. But this time, when I walked in, the desk had been moved, and in its place was something I didn't expect. A cello, beautiful and old, sitting in a stand like it was waiting for someone. "I don't understand," I said, moving closer to examine it. "It belonged to a collector I know," Salvatore said, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. When I told him I was looking for an instrument for someone special, he said this one had been waiting for the right person. "I thought of you immediately." I turned in his arms, tears stinging my eyes. "I don't play the cello." "Then learn." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "You told me once that you used to play piano, that your mother taught you before she died. I thought maybe you'd like to have music in your life again." It was the most thoughtful gift anyone had ever given me, a recognition not just of who I was, but who I'd been, who I could be again. I kissed him, pouring everything I felt into it, gratitude and love and joy all tangled together. "I love you," I said against his lips, the words I'd been holding back because they felt too big, too soon, too intense. "I know," he replied, smiling. "I've known since that first night when you looked at me without fear and told me you wanted me despite everything. I love you too, Elena, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." A year after I'd stumbled into his lobby crying and desperate, Salvatore asked me to marry him, not with grand gestures or public displays, but quietly, privately, in his apartment on a Tuesday evening while we were making dinner together. He just turned to me, flour on his hands from the pasta dough we were making, and said, "Marry me." I dropped the wooden spoon I was holding. "What?" "Marry me," repeated, and there was vulnerability in his eyes I'd rarely seen. I know my world is complicated. I know being my wife will mean accepting things most people never have to think about. But I want you beside me officially, legally, permanently. I want everyone to know you're mine, and I'm yours. So marry me, Elena. Please. I didn't hesitate. Yes. He kissed me then, lifting me onto the counter and kissing me like I was air and he'd been drowning. And we never did finish making that pasta. Later, lying in his bed with his ring on my finger, a simple band of platinum that somehow fit perfectly, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been a woman running from her past, terrified and broken, and convinced she'd never be safe. Now I was lying beside a man who'd seen every damaged part of me and loved me not despite them, but because they'd made me who I was. I'd found safety, yes, but I'd also found so much more. I'd found belonging, purpose, a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. "What are you thinking?" Salvatore asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my bare shoulder. "That I'm happy," I said simply. That for someone who thought she'd never escape her nightmare, I ended up finding a dream I didn't even know I wanted. He pulled me closer, tucking me against his chest, where I could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "We found each other," he corrected. "And I promise you, Elena, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret walking into my office crying." "I could never regret it," I said. "It was the best mistake I ever made." We married quietly a month later, just his immediate family and a handful of his closest men. No big celebration, no public announcement, just two people promising to build a life together despite the odds against them. His mother cried, though I wasn't sure if it was from happiness or resignation. Marco came but left early, uncomfortable as always with the reality of his brother's world. But Vincent was there, and the other men who'd become familiar faces, and they raised their glasses to us with genuine warmth. These dangerous men who'd made careers out of violence and intimidation smiled at their boss's happiness and welcomed me into their strange family with open arms. The first year of our marriage taught me more about Salvatore's world than the months before had. I learned about the constant negotiations, the delicate balance of power, the way he had to be 3 steps ahead of everyone else just to stay even. I learned about the nights he couldn't sleep, haunted by decisions that cost lives, even when they were necessary. I learned about the weight he carried, the responsibility of protecting not just his business, but the hundreds of families that depended on it. But I also learned about his capacity for gentleness, for patience, for love that ran deeper than I'd imagined possible. He never brought his darkness home if he could help it, never let his stress become my burden. He held me every night, kissed me every morning, and made sure I knew every single day that I was cherished. We built a life together that was part normal, part extraordinary. I still worked my accounting job, still had coffee with Sarah, and complained about difficult clients. But I also attended meetings with Salvatore sometimes, sitting quietly in the corner while he negotiated with other families, my presence a statement that I was his partner in all things. I learned to read the subtle cues, to understand when to speak and when to stay silent, to navigate the complex social structures of his world. And slowly, I became more than just Salvatore's wife. I became someone in my own right within his organization, someone the men respected and the other families acknowledged. I used my accounting skills to help legitimate some of his businesses, to find ways to protect assets and minimize risks. I became his advisor in ways he hadn't expected, offering perspectives he'd never considered. 2 years after our wedding, I got pregnant. It was unexpected, something we hadn't specifically planned but both wanted. Salvatore was terrified in a way I'd never seen before, convinced something would go wrong, that he'd somehow fail this child the way he'd failed Isabella. But I held his hand through every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, and watched him slowly transform from terrified to amazed to completely besotted. Our daughter was born on a spring morning, tiny and perfect, and with her father's gray eyes. Salvatore held her like she was made of glass, tears streaming down his face as he counted her fingers and toes and whispered promises in Italian that I only half understood. He named her Isabella after the sister he'd lost, and I watched something in him heal that day, some old wound finally closing now that he had someone new to protect and cherish. Being parents changed us both. Salvatore became even more careful, even more strategic, determined to build a world where our daughter could be safe. He started moving more of his operations into legitimate businesses, using his connections and capital to create an empire that could survive legal scrutiny. He was still dangerous, still powerful, still very much the man who controlled the city's shadows. But now he had something to lose beyond just his own life, and it made him both more cautious and more ruthless. I became fierce in ways I'd never been before, protective of our daughter with an intensity that surprised me. This tiny person who depended on us completely gave me a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I was no longer just the woman who'd run from her abuser. I was a mother, a wife, a partner in an empire, and I refused to let anyone or anything threaten what we'd built. On our 5th anniversary, Salvatore took me back to the building on 5th and Morrison, to the lobby where I'd first stumbled through the door, desperate and afraid. It had been renovated since then, lighter and more welcoming, but the bones were the same. "Do you remember?" he asked, pulling me close. "Every detail," I said, resting my head on his shoulder. "I thought I was running into danger. I had no idea I was running toward home." "I knew," he said quietly. "The moment I saw you, terrified and crying and still somehow brave enough to ask for help, I knew you were going to change everything. I just didn't know how completely, how thoroughly you'd transform my entire world." I looked up at him, this man who'd given me safety, and love, and a life I'd never dreamed possible. "We transformed each other," I said. "You made me strong, and I made you soft. And somehow, together, we became exactly what we both needed." He kissed me there in the lobby where everything had started, and I tasted salt on his lips and realized he was crying. This man who ruled through fear and power and unwavering control was crying because 5 years ago, a desperate woman had stumbled into his building and changed everything. "I love you," he whispered against my lips. "For the rest of our lives, and whatever comes after, I love you." "I love you too," I replied. "Thank you for being there that day, for not turning me away, for seeing past my tears to who I could become." We stood there, wrapped together, while the city moved around us. Two people who'd found each other in the darkness and built something bright and lasting and real. My story didn't end with escape or survival. It ended with love, with partnership, with a man who'd lost everything learning to protect what mattered most. And maybe that's what redemption really looks like, not changing who you are, but finding someone whose love makes you want to be better, stronger, worthy of what you've been given. I'd walked into Salvatore Moroni's office broken and afraid, and I'd walked out transformed, not because he'd saved me, but because he'd given me the space and safety to save myself. And that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you felt it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference, and helps us continue creating stories that touch the soul.